Black Panther Blood Hunt Issue 1 opens with T'Challa in the Jalia, the spiritual plane of Wakanda. He has come here to plead with his god, Bast, that she might free him from Blade's influence and bite. But the Panthers there that represent Bast dismiss him. He is infected, corrupted. The Black Panther is supposed to be Bast's champion, not her burden. The people of Wakanda will be no one's slave, man or god, and he can take that message back to his master. In the physical world, T'Challa now returns to his body. He is in the Temple of Bast, where he is quickly discovered by some guards. Consuming the heart-shaped herb has returned some of his senses to him, but T'Challa is still struggling with the influence of his vampire's bite. It has been a long time since he last fed, and although he hasn't tasted human blood yet, the vampire influence inside of him demands it. Still, when he is caught by those guards and has to fight them, T'Challa does hold back. He is mostly focused on dodging their attacks or disarming them. He does finally pull off his mask at one point and just demand that they recognize their former king, and the guards do stop. It looks like T'Challa has the vampire influence too. He then decides to help the people of Wakanda, as his role as the Black Panther demands, and his own personal nature. Blade appears inside of his mind, demanding that he get back on mission. He is to find the temple and deliver it to Blade. The longer that he takes, the more the people of Wakanda will suffer. Blade chose him because he is the last of the first, but maybe that was a mistake. T'Challa agrees, yeah, you should never turn me into a vampire, man, and runs off into the night. He first encounters Adzi, the mother of pestilence, a demon that has grown bold under the cover of Dark Force darkness. They do fight, and the Black Panther ends up running her off. He goes to check on her victim, and as he does so, he gets near her throat, and he lifts his mask. He can smell her blood, but he holds back. Just as he makes that decision, a blade is pressed against his throat. Shuri, T'Challa's sister, stands over him. She then cuts her hand and offers the blood to him. T'Challa drinks, and it is sweet. For a moment, he thinks that if he had a choice, he would never stop drinking. And then he sees the pity in her eyes. He stops, which is when the woman bitten by Adzi floats into the air. She is still hungry, and her jaw cracks open to turn into insect-like mandibles. So Shuri blasts her in the face, killing her. She laments these trying times that they're going through, but Shuri thinks that she has a solution to them. She might need an Avenger's help to pull it off, bro. But when she turns to tell it to him, her brother is gone. T'Challa moves through the city. We see him fighting alongside the Hatut Zeraz with their UV rays. He joins the forces of the Dora Milaje, and he fights on his own until he finally collapses, begging for Bast's help. Blade appears to him again, taunting him, trying to get him to finish his task. T'Challa resists, but it is clear that he is suffering and having a hard time with it. A hologram of Shuri, projected from a drone, greets him. She explains that she is safe at the moment, secure under the light of an artificial sun. She has a number of people that she has saved, but it just isn't enough. The Dark Force hasn't managed to breach Latveria, she says, so maybe we should talk to Von Doom, and here T'Challa says, no, absolutely not. You do not ask Dr. Doom for help. Shuri doesn't really care for his demands, though. T'Challa doesn't get to make proclamations like that anymore. He isn't their king. He can't even rule himself right now. T'Challa cuts off contact with his sister and pulls off the silver claws from his neck. Shuri's right. He lets them drop to the ground. The longer T'Challa fights Blade's command, the more at risk he is of becoming a monster. So he leaves the city, exiling himself. The farther from humanity he goes, the better T'Challa feels. He is less drawn to act like a predator out here in the jungles. But out here, he is prey. An actual Black Panther stalks him, and now he must fight his namesake. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown's coverage of Blood Hunt, Episode 12. The Black Panther is one dramatic vampire. So in all honesty, I did read this comic when it first came out to see if it was going to have any kind of major impact on Blood Hunt's story. Having now told y'all the contents, it looked like it wouldn't. That's why I stayed away. This issue is pretty much built around T'Challa and his emotional state. How is he dealing with being a vampire? How is he resisting Blade's orders? None of this is bad from a storytelling perspective, but it is certainly disconnected from the rest of Blood Hunt's main narrative. None of this appears to look like it's going to have anything to do with anything else, so I just thought that it was skippable. You see, I'm really trying to cut back on my overall comics consumption at the moment. In May of 2024, I was regularly buying something like 50 plus individual comics, which is a lot of money on a monthly basis. And thankfully for me, a lot of those comics have been ending, and amongst them was the previous volume of Black Panther. And I loved that comic, don't get me wrong, but when a comic ends, that isn't just a good jumping on point for the next volume, it is a great jumping off point for the previous one. And I was afraid that Marvel was going to use Black Panther Blood Hunt to kind of like stealth launch the next volume of Black Panther, like maybe author Cheryl Eaton is writing this miniseries, and then when the next volume launched, she will be carried over into that next series. And to be quite honest, I just didn't want to be along for the ride. I'm trying to cut back on my comics. I'm going to sit this one out, y'all. But then T'Challa teleported a massive stone temple into Central Park, which is most definitely a big part of Blade's plan over in Blood Hunt issue 4, and I knew I couldn't sit this miniseries out any longer. Then issue 2 came out, and I read issue 2 online, and I actually really liked it, so here we are, getting into it. And the basic story here works. I like T'Challa abandoning his vampire-assigned quest and trying to find solutions instead. I like him asking Bast for help with this. I like the reason why Bast refuses to help, even if I do think that is a jerk move on her part. And I like T'Challa essentially pretending that being a vampire isn't a thing. When Bast says, no, I won't help you, T'Challa literally just goes, fine, I guess I'll save the people of Wakanda by myself. And then he goes to do it. He just runs off and he's like, I'll just help people. There's almost no personal concern for himself from T'Challa, which very much feels like the arrogant, heroic, T'Challa-like thing for him to do. Well, fine, if you won't help me, I'll find a solution. That's actually one of the things that I enjoyed the most about reading this comic. Everything that T'Challa does is important to him. There are these heroic actions that help him keep track of who he is as a person, but then he also screws every one of those things up for perfectly heroic reasons. There's a lot of shame in T'Challa in this story, partially because his new vampire instincts are telling him to eat blood, partially because he needs to admit that he needs help, which is not an easy thing for T'Challa to ever do, partially because he feels like he failed his nation and his people by being turned into a vampire, and partially because it just feels like there's nothing he can really do. He can attack demons and stake vampires all day, but so long as the Dark Force dome is covering the planet, there's no easy solution for vampires. T'Challa, as far as he's concerned, is failing at every turn, and that is not something that T'Challa does very often. It's like all of his negative behaviors have been enhanced in this particular story, and he's just doing a terrible job coping with it. And I really like that aspect of the story because, A, he's still struggling against it. Like, everything sucks for T'Challa right now. And he's not quitting. He's not giving up. He is trying to find solutions. That's the heroic thing to do, even if these particular solutions aren't working right now. Author Cheryl Eaton makes good use of Black Panther's surrounding lore and world here as well. So it's not just great character work, it's good all-around work. I like Shuri trying to help T'Challa, and I do like that she has a plan, because T'Challa sure haven't been working out in this story. I do not know who or what the Adzi monster is. I do not know if that's a like really long established part of Black Panther lore or if that's a part of African mythology. But I do like the idea that the Dark Force Darkness is allowing native Wakandan threats to kind of crawl out where it would be hiding in the shadows normally and just be an open problem in the streets. And when Shuri proposes contacting Latveria for aid from Doctor Doom, I love T'Challa's vehement reaction. Doom once either did take over Wakanda or he tried to take over Wakanda in a mini-series called Doom War, published back in 2010, which I've never actually read, but just knowing that happened is enough of a reason for T'Challa's reaction. And if you didn't know that, I like it because T'Challa has good reasons otherwise. You know, Victor Von Doom is a manipulative, possessive, brilliant, arrogant man. Any aid that he gives Wakanda is going to have strings attached to it. T'Challa knows this, but he's also so lost in his sauce right now that he isn't doing what's best for Wakanda. He's trying to do what's best for him personally. If allying with Doom would potentially save his nation, isn't that worth it? Isn't that the cost of being the former king and the premier superhero of your country? Previous volumes of Black Panther, I would have said yes. And I really like that because you don't often get to see T'Challa being, I don't want to say selfish because that feels like a really negative trait, but you don't really see T'Challa ever focus on himself in his stories. He is always trying to do what is best for the people of Wakanda and the people around him, but now that he's no longer their king, and in theory he really shouldn't even be the Black Panther in Wakanda right now, he's really just freed up to do whatever he thinks is right, and so he's trying to do what's best for him. He tries to free himself of the vampire curse. And when that fails, he pretends to be a superhero, saving people's lives. And when he decides that he himself is too big of a threat to those people, he leaves the city as a way of protecting them. T'Challa thinks that he's doing good work when he's really just wallowing in self-pity. And it's a kind of low point that this character doesn't get to go to all that often. You don't really see this in a lot of Black Panther stories. I have to assume that this is one of the reasons that T'Challa hasn't contacted the Avengers at all. And, like, sure, I know that the core team just got their butts handed to them story-wise in the first issue of Blood Hunt. I know Steve Rogers has his makeshift team fighting Baron Blood in New York. I like it. But, you know, there are like 4 dozen people who would answer the call to an Avengers assembled. And plus, there's a bunch of unrelated heroes to the Avengers who would help T'Challa regardless. And if he's been sent on this super important secret mission for Blade that is a key, crucial part of Blade's plan, why wouldn't you tell somebody that mission? Why wouldn't you be like, hey guys, I've been sent to get this temple. Can anybody, like, come stop me or slow me down? Just from a strategic standpoint, that feels like a Black Panther move to do. Like, I don't know. He could ask, let's see really quick. You've got Wakandan native mutant Nesno, who, depending on your X-Men comic reading, either might be on the planet or isn't on the planet, and who is a very passive character to begin with. He doesn't want to engage in violence, but he would if it was asked of him to protect people's lives. You've got the Buffalo Soldier, who just showed up in the last volume of Black Panther, written by John Ridley. I'm sure Storm would show up to maintain a line against T'Challa, and given that Storm has been advertised as about to be joining the Avengers in the story arc following Blood Hunt, this could be a good place to kind of set up her story there. And then you've got other more broad-scale characters like, and I know this is because I'm a 90s guy, you could have Hannibal King, the heroic vampire, show up and maybe, like, coach T'Challa through his bloodlust. Like, hey man, I know what it's like to want to suck people's blood and you don't want to do it. Even if King was just there to be the clear-minded individual in the room, that could be a lot of help to someone like T'Challa, who he can't hurt, but he also doesn't have to listen to unless he needs to. That said, this is a 3-issue miniseries focused on T'Challa's, for the most part, T'Challa's inner battle with being a vampire, and then, of course, the main story role. We're going to see with issue 2, the story shifts from kind of, it's a Black Panther story to a lot of lore happening. And so adding in another character to spend time with T'Challa would distract from a lot of that and would add one more thing that we have to deal with that maybe we just don't have room and time to deal with. So I get it. It's just kind of one of the downsides to the incredibly fast-paced narrative that we are getting with Blood Hunt overall. It's not a bad thing. I'm not saying more characters would necessarily make this a better story. I just think from an in-world logistical perspective, it doesn't make sense for T'Challa to need help, but then not ask for help, especially when he was the last Avengers chairperson and really worked to expand the Avengers roster and bring in more reserve characters to kind of help lift the weight. When the main Avengers were like off in another dimension, you would have other characters defending the planet. So it does feel like a bit of a wasted opportunity. I ended up overall enjoying this particular comic a lot more than I wanted to enjoy it, which, I mean, let's face it, that's a good thing, right? Eaton writes T'Challa really well, in my opinion. He's a good mix of heroic and desperate, prideful and lost. She makes good use of his current situation because he isn't the king of Wakanda anymore, but he is still struggling with what that means for him and what it means for Wakanda. And while the artwork by Farid Karami isn't something that is my personal taste in comics, I do think that he does a great job here. His style is very realistic, which makes the unrealistic things like the Adzi demon look just way more horrifying. And when the woman's jaw splits open and becomes insect mandibles, great monster stuff. And the panthers that T'Challa encounters look great. Finding an author who can draw animals and humans and monsters and buildings and stuff isn't easy. You get at least 1-2 page spread in this, which has multiple panels and multiple characters and action sequences, and it looks good. It works. I do think that Karami's T'Challa's maybe he's bigger than I typically think of the Black Panther, but that's also something that varies from artist to artist. Mark Texiera made T'Challa a big guy back during Christopher Priest's initial run on Black Panther back in the Marvel Knights volume. So he's a little big for me. I tend to think of T'Challa as being more athletic than I think of him as like a big buff Superman type character. But I love his look with the beard at the moment. I think he draws one of the best T'Challa faces that I've seen in comic books in recent history. So that's pretty great. This particular issue of the story does feel super disconnected from the main Blood Hunt story, as a Blood Hunt tie-in, but the drama surrounding T'Challa is so well done that I'm just kind of having a good time with it. Every big vampire story needs at least one character who gets turned into a vampire, and for the X-Men, it was Jubilee, to really hit home how bad it is, right? We're so familiar with vampires that the threat has become kind of commonplace. We get it. You get bit in the neck, you turn into a vampire. Who cares? Well, T'Challa cares because he's the one trying to save people's lives, and he also wants to drink their blood at the same time. And that's a terrible burden to have to carry. So I do think that's really great. And of course, we do know that this does impact on Blood Hunt now. So even if the drama's not working for you, there is a bit of a narrative reason to be buying it. Honestly, I just think Eaton is doing some great work with that idea here. I really enjoyed this. On our next episode, obviously, we're going to be covering Black Panther issue 2. I'm trying to get caught up before issue 3 drops, and it drops this Wednesday, which when I record this is tomorrow. So unfortunately, I'm going to be running a little bit behind, and I'm sorry, but we're going to get there. We're going to get a big lore dump. We get a big confirmation with this particular issue, and a pretty cool fight scene. If you enjoyed this episode of Breakdown, please make sure to hit that like button, and if you are not subscribed to the show, then click on that as well. I love getting feedback, and I would really appreciate it if you did so. If you have any questions, concerns, or would like to suggest a comic or a series to me, Breakdown can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and on a variety of podcast platforms, with links in the description for this episode below, as well as the email cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Thank you for your time and attention.